Hello everyone, my name is Ujjwal and I'm from the Brightchamps team. In this video, I will be teaching you how to make a fighter game using the Scratch platform. So let me first show you the game. By the end of this tutorial, you will be able to learn how to make a space fighter game like this. I'm going to start the game and show you how it works. We have a player drone that can attack. Every time I attack an enemy drone, I get a score incremented by 1. But if the enemy drone attacks me, then the game stops. Now let us look at the steps involved to make this game. The steps involved to make this game are: the first step is to make the player drone move. The second step would be to make the player drone launch its missiles. The third step would be to design the enemy drone. The fourth step would be to create a blast effect for the enemy drone whenever it is attacked. The fifth step would be to add a score feature for the game, and finally number 6 is to stop the game when the player drone is attacked. So now let's get started by taking and going to the Scratch platform. So here we are in the Scratch platform, and let us start by adding the sprite for the game. I'm going to choose a sprite which is already there in the Scratch sprites, which is a rocket. Let us rename this sprite as player drone, and let me change the size to 30% so that it looks appropriate for the game. And I'm positioning this player drone right at the bottom of the screen. Now, when the flag is clicked, I want the sprite to be at the position always. So I'm going to use the X coordinates and Y coordinates. So since my drone is right at the center, so I'm going to put a go to XY block with the coordinates of X and Y as it is, which is shown here. So they get automatically updated in the block. Now, when this game starts, I should be able to move it towards the right and left whenever the key is pressed. So for that, I'm going to use a if block, and when the right arrow key is pressed, so I'm going to use a block which says right arrow key pressed, and then I have to move it in the x-axis. So I'm going to change its x direction, so position on the x-axis by 6 steps. And the same thing I want it on the left side, so I'm going to duplicate this simply and make it to the left arrow. And this time, let me make it to -6. This is going to make its movement towards the left -6 and towards the right as +6. And since I want this to be throughout the game, I'm going to put a forever block for these both the conditions. Now let us check if it's working fine. Now as you can see, the player drone is moving left and right perfectly. The next step is to add a missile. And whenever the space is pressed, the player drone should launch its missile. Now for that, I have to design a sprite, which is a missile. I'll be going to the paint section and drawing my missile. For that, let us choose a color. I'm going to choose this orange color, which looks absolutely fine for a missile. Now I'm going to choose this outline to 0, and let me draw a small rectangle square, which is a thin one. So it is a rectangle right here. And let me decrease the size a bit and also make it a little thin so that it looks absolutely like a small missile. Okay, now this is perfectly looking fine, and this is suitable for us to launch it as a missile. Let me change the name of the costume also as a missile, and also let me change the sprite name as missile. Now next step is this missile has to be launched only when the space is pressed. So let us give the condition in the drone that when the key space is pressed. So if the key space is pressed, then we have to say the missile to launch. So the missile, since I want multiple missiles to be launched many times whenever the key is pressed, that means I have to create duplicate copies. For that, let us use the clone feature. I'm going to say create a clone of the missile every time whenever the key is pressed, and I'm going to wait for 0.2 seconds so that there is no error during the execution of the clone. Now let us go to the missile and do the code. So initially when the game starts, obviously the missile should not be seen. So I'm going to use a when flag click and going to put a hide block. And then since the missile has to take a position wherever the player drone is, let us use when the clone is starting. So when I start as a clone, the position of this missile should be only near the player drone. So for that, I'm going to use a go to block, and in this go to, I'm going to change it to player drone So this block will make the missile always go to the position of the player drone. The next step is I have to make it travel throughout the game from the drone till the end of this particular screen. So it has to go to the top. So let us make a note of the top of the screen or the coordinates of the top. So it is saying as 173, the y-axis. Now let us assume it to be 175. So until and unless the missile reaches 175, then it should keep on changing its y-axis. It should keep on increasing its y-axis. But once it reaches the 175th point on the y-axis, then I don't want this duplicate anymore. I want this missile to be hidden. Now let us do that. Since this I'm using hide over here, I also have to use a show block for making it to show up. Now I'm going to put a show, and also I'm going to make its position repeat itself. So I'm going to use a repeat block, and as we got a note that it should repeat until the Y position crosses 175. So I'm going to use a Y position block in this place. So this is going to make a note of only the Y position, and it's going to repeat until it reaches that position. So let us change its Y. Let us put the speed as 20. So it's going to take 20 steps on the y-axis every time, and once after it goes up, it's going to delete. But let us see if it's working fine. So I started it, and now I click, it's going fine. And finally, as I don't want this missile at the top of the screen, let us add a delete clone block. This is going to delete this clone forever. Now let us check. Yes, it's absolutely working perfect. The next step would be to create the enemy drone. Now to create the enemy drone, I'm going to pick the same sprite, which is the rocket. So let us pick the same rocket again, but this time let us change its costume to make it as an enemy drone. I'm going to go to costumes. Let us delete all the unnecessary costumes for now, and let us change this color to red so that it looks perfectly like an enemy drone. So I'm going to take the fill bucket and just change its colors so that this is looking perfectly like an enemy drone. Let us change the name also as enemy drone, and I'm also going to rename the sprite over here like as enemy drone. Now the enemy drone costume and the sprite is ready. Now I want this enemy drone to always come from the top. Let us decrease its size for now as 30%, and this is going to come right from the top always. That means the Y is always going to be the same, that is 150 for now. But its x-axis, the point on the x-axis, it can take any location. So sometimes I want the enemies to come from the left side, sometimes the center, and sometimes on the right side. That means the x-axis, the location can change anywhere on x-axis. Let us do this now. For this, initially I want the enemy drones to be hidden when I start the game. So I'm going to use a hide block, similarly like how we did for the missile. And I want to wait for a couple of seconds and then start the enemy drones. So I'm going to wait for 3 seconds, and after 3 seconds I want these enemy drones to be popping up. That means after 3 seconds I want the drones to be started. But since I want multiple drones on my screen, for that reason we will be using the same method of creating a clone. Let us take a forever block now, and let us use create clone of myself. This is going to create a clone of itself every time. But if it creates continuously, then it becomes very difficult for the player drone to keep attacking. Now let us wait for a few seconds whenever it creates a clone. So I'm going to put a 2 seconds wait block over here. That makes the clone creation wait for 2 seconds every time. Now when this starts as a clone, I have to tell from which point it is going to start. So for that, let us also use the go to XY block again. I'm going to use this go to XY block with my Y axis. The point on the Y axis is 154, which means the top of the screen. But my X axis, as we discussed, can take any point. So to take any random point, I'm going to use the pick random block and put it in the X coordinate. Over here, I have to give the location on the X axis from which point to which point it can take. Let us check it manually. I'm going to put the enemy drone on the leftmost side of the screen. As you can see, it is -216. And the same way on the positive side, that means on the right side, it will also be similar to 216. Let us give these points. So from minus 216 to the positive 216, the x point can take any random point between these two numbers. So we have given the x coordinate and y coordinate appropriately for the drone to start from the top. The next thing is I have to make it pointed towards the bottom. The drone is right now facing the top, but I want this to be facing to the bottom. Now let us change its direction. So I'm going to change the point in direction as minus 90. This will make the drone point downwards. And then since I used a height block initially, now I have to show up for this enemy drone to start from the top. Now, after using the show, I have to change its Y. That means the drone has to start from the top and gradually come down. That means the Y is decreasing. So the Y keeps on decreasing until it reaches the minimum point on the screen. The bottommost point on the screen, as we see, the Y is minus 169. That means until it reaches minus 169, it should keep on decreasing its Y. But once if it touches or becomes lesser than minus 169, I have to make it disappear. So for that, let us use the same concept of repeat until. So I'm going to repeat until it is lesser than minus 169. So let us put the Y position block over here inside the operator block. So it's going to repeat until it reaches minus 169. Now I have to change the Y. That is, it has to keep on decreasing from the top. Now let us give the speed as, for example, minus 2. Now this will make it come down. Now let us check the game. As you can see, it is waiting for 3 seconds and then it is perfectly coming. After 2 seconds, the clone is getting started every time. Now, since it is coming in reaching to the bottommost position, which is minus 169, I don't want these to be appearing anymore. For that, let us use a delete clone block. So let us put a delete clone block at the end, which is going to delete this clone forever. Now this will make the drone disappear once after it reaches the bottommost position. It's absolutely working fine. The next step is whenever the missile is attacking the enemy drone has to have a blast effect, and the score also has to be incremented by 1. Now let us do these 2 steps. The first step is to create a blast effect whenever the enemy drone is touched by a missile. For that, let us use the if condition. So if the enemy drone is touched, so I'm going to sensing and taking the touching block. So if the enemy drone is touching a missile, then I have to create a blast effect. So for creating the blast effect, let us create another costume. Let us go to the costumes, and over here, let us paint the costume for the blast. To create a blast effect, we are going to go to the color and let us choose a gradient over here. And then let me change the color over here to maybe orangish yellow. And this will absolutely look like a blast. Let us take a circle tool and draw a circle shape. Now this costume, let us name this as blast. So this is what we are going to change the costume to whenever it touches the missile. Now let us go to the looks and let us switch its costume to blast whenever it touches the missile. And also we want to create a blast effect, that is, the blast has to come and it should gradually disappear on the screen. That we will be using the chain size to change its size of the blast costume gradually. It should keep increasing gradually and finally it should disappear. For disappearing purpose, let us use the ghost effect. So I'm going to use the ghost effect. So let us increase the size by 5 and the ghost effect by 5, and let us repeat this 2 steps 20 times so that it absolutely looks like a blast effect. Now I'm going to put this inside over here, and then since I don't want that to be appeared anymore, I want to delete this clone. So since the blast is done, let us put the delete clone at the bottom. Now let us check if this is working fine. So I will put this above inside the if condition. Now let us check if this is working. So we have the enemy drones coming. Okay, we see that the enemy drones coming in the costume of the blast, because here we have told that it is switched costume to blast. That means initially when it is coming, it should again switch back to its original costume. So let us make its original costume switch costume to enemy drone. Now let us check if it's working fine. Now as you can see, the enemy drone started coming. Now you can see there is a blast effect absolutely working fine, which is used by making the ghost effect and change its size. Great. This is working absolutely good. Then the next step is when this enemy drone touches the player drone, then the player drone also has to blast. So to make the player drone blast, we will have to make the player drone another costume, which is the blast costume, and also use the same logic which we used over here. So first let us give the if condition for this enemy drone, that if this enemy drone is touching, if this enemy drone is touching the player drone, then this has to tell the player drone to blast. So for this purpose, we are going to use a broadcast message. The broadcast message can be used whenever we want to pass on messages between the sprites. Now this player drone has to get a message when this enemy drone is touching it. So for that, let us type a message as explode player drone. So now I have created a broadcast message saying explode player drone, and then I don't want this enemy drone anymore. So let us also say I'm going to hide this enemy drone forever. Now this is the thing that I want, so I'm putting it below here. Now when it is touching the player drone, this is going to send a message to the player drone to explode itself. So let us go to the player drone and do the code over here for that. So when this receives a message, so when I receive a message of explode player drone, same way I want a costume for this. So let us go to the costumes, let us delete the unwanted costumes, and let us make another costume similarly to as we have created for the drone, and I'm going to put it over here right at the center. And now let us name the costume also as blast, and then let us go back to the code. So here we have to start the game every time with switch costume to rocket, but whenever it explodes, I want the switch costume to be blast, and after that I want it to have a ghost effect similar to what we had for the enemy drone. So for that reason, let us again use the same logic of repeating it 20 times by changing its size and also adding the ghost effect. So to change its size, go to looks and take the change size block, make it to 5, and also let us change the ghost effect by 5, and let us put the ghost effect to 5. And finally, the rocket should not appear anymore. So let us say the hide block, because the player drone is a tag, so that means it is done. So after the blast effect is done, we will have to hide this, and finally we will also have to make a game over message because the game stops. So let us also add another broadcast message saying the game to stop. So I'm going to say game over. Let us type game over here. That's it. Now we are sending this message as soon as the rocket is blasted. Now let us check if it is working fine. Once after the enemy drones start coming, I'm going to let the enemy drone touch the player drone. Yes, it's absolutely working fantastic. Now the next step is all the enemy drones should stop coming once after the player drone is attacked. So for that, let us use this broadcast message, and let us also add the different backgrounds for the game. So to create a background, let us go to the background section, and I'm going to choose a background of space which is already available in Scratch. I'm going to use this galaxy. This is looking absolutely fine. Let us add another costumes for this. So let us rename the costume and add a duplicate copy of the same one. So rename it as game over. And now let us also type the text as game over here. I have typed game over. Let me make it a little bigger so that it looks better on the screen, and I'm going to position it at the center. Now this is looking perfectly fine, and let me then go and add another costume because I want another costume when the game starts. So let me rename the costume as game start, and now I don't want this text over here. So for that, let me duplicate, instead of duplicating game over, let me duplicate the galaxy. I'm going to duplicate this and make it as game start and use the text tool and write as space fighter. This will be the heading for the game, and let us make this text a little bigger and let us position it at the center. Now this is looking perfectly fine for the game start background. Now let us use these two backgrounds and appropriately code so that the backgrounds come up at the right time. So whenever I receive the message of game over, so when I receive a message as game over, I want to switch the backdrop. So I'm going to use the switch backdrop from the looks, and I'm going to use game over. So let us use the first one and let us just put it to game over. And after that, once after it is switched the background, I want everything to stop. So I'm going to use stop all at the end. Similarly, when the game starts, I want the background to be as space fighter for 2 seconds and then change the background to the galaxy background. So for that also, let us add the code, which is whenever the flag is clicked, initially when the game is started, I want the backdrop to be, switch the backdrop to game start, and then I want to wait for 2 seconds over here like this. And after waiting for 2 seconds, I want the backdrop to be again changed to galaxy while playing, because I don't want this backdrop with the text of space fighter anymore. So I'm going to put the normal background, which was galaxy, after 2 seconds. So this is going to change after 2 seconds. And now here initially, I should not make the player drone visible immediately when the flag is clicked, because the game is actually starting after 2 seconds of the space fighter background appears. That is why let us remove the when flag clicked over here in the player drone, and instead of when flag clicked, let us start the game after the backdrop switches. So for that, let us put the block as when backdrop switches to galaxy, then the game is started. Similarly, let us also go to the missile and check. So missile is obviously launched only when the space is clicked, so there is no need to change any code over here. And now finally, let us also go to the clone. So here also, the clones of the enemy drone are started whenever the flag is clicked after waiting for 3 seconds. But in fact, this should start only when the game starts after the background is switched to galaxy. So that is why instead of using when flag click, let us use the same block as when backdrop switches to galaxy. Now let us see if the game is working absolutely fine. Let us play the game and check. Now I have got a backdrop of switch fighter. After 2 seconds, the backdrop got switched. And yes, the enemy drone started coming. But as you can see, our player drone is not visible because initially we have hidden this player drone. So I am not going to show it again. So that is why I have to show it again so that it appears again. Now I have put a show block over here. That means this player drone, after the game is over, it will hide, but whenever the game starts, it will show again. So now let us check the game. So space fighter, and you also see that the player drone is enlarged, because in the ghost effect, we have enlarged the size. That means we have to again resize it every time. That is why let us also set its size. So let us also change the size of this player drone by change or set its size to, I'm going to make it to 30%. Now let us play again and see. It is going to stop the game, and let us play the game again. Now when I clicked on the flag, when I started the game, initially also when the space fighter heading was started, I was able to see my player drone. So I don't want the player drone to be visible when my game starts. So that is why let us also use when flag clicked separately, and that means whenever the flag is clicked, I want this to be hidden, but when the backdrop switches to galaxy, I want this to show up with the size 30%, and finally when it explodes again, I want this to create a ghost effect, that is the blast effect, and then finally hide it. Now I think the game should probably work perfect. Let us check. Yes, it's working absolutely fine. The missiles are also being launched perfectly. And yes, I also have this explosion of all the things. Now let us see If if it stops, yes, the game stops after the player drone is attacked. And finally, we left with one thing, that is adding the score feature. To add the score feature, we have to go to variables and create a score variable in order to store the score. So let us go to the variables and add a score variable over here. Now the score is being stored every time in this variable, and the score always should be incremented by 1 only when the missile touches the enemy drone. So that is why let us go to the code where we did the missile, and here when we did the code for the player enemy drone, that if the touching the missile, here let us add a score variable by changing the variable by 1. So I'm going to change the variable of the score by 1 whenever the enemy drone is touched by the missile. And now also whenever the game starts, I want the score to be 0. That is why let us add set score to 0 when flag clicked. So I'm going to add when flag clicked. Under when flag clicked, I'm adding set score to 0. Let us check if it's working. I'm going to click on the green flag, and now whenever any enemy drone is attacked, you can see the score is always incremented by 1. So this makes the game complete. I hope you like the game very much and will wait to see your game soon. And if you have any questions related to this tutorial, or if you have any further suggestions that you would like to add extra features for this game, then we would love to hear them in the comment section below. So you can feel free to leave your comments over there, and all your doubts also will be clarified by me. And so I finally request you to please share, subscribe and like these videos, because we will be launching more these kind of amazing videos every day. Thank you so much for watching the video. We will see you again soon in the next video. Thanks a lot.